That's why I always say, "What's up, dorks?"
Yeah. There you go.
We're here.
Yeah.
We're going to chat.
So in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the Power Platform. This is kind of like a fireside chat of sorts. So I've got Michaela here with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about our experience from the perspective of someone who kind of came from a non-pro dev world and stepping into no-code, low-code development in the Power Platform, and somebody who came from a pro dev world, and some of the things that we've learned, the lessons learned. So let's just get started there.
Cool.
What were some of the, let's talk about, for people who are in those positions, maybe coming into the Power Platform or trying to learn how to use it for the first time, what were some of the frustrations that we faced? What were some of the challenges that we faced? A couple areas where it comes to mind for me, like the big areas, are things like understanding solution design and organization and like where to put your stuff, how to assemble your things. And then the other one is, well, it's no code, low code. And so it's what you see is what you get, right? WYSIWYG. And there are limitations. And so you hit those limitations, and then what do you do, right? So those were some of those frustrations. What are, let's get specific and talk about, let's say, solutions. Like, what were some of the things that you've bumped into? Let's just start there.
Yeah. What have I bumped into? Other than the main one that's been challenging us lately of having a solution that's stuck in a state where we can't do an upgrade and we can only do an update. So we can't delete items from it, and it's kind of accumulating things that we don't want.
Yep.
Other than that, my first experience with managed versus unmanaged solutions, I did not realize exactly what I was doing. I was fresh to ALM. I kind of talked about it in my ALM video on YouTube. And
so everyone, ALM is Application Lifecycle Management, for those who aren't familiar with that
and you
acronym.
Should watch my video on it if you haven't.
Yeah.
And I accidentally deleted it, thinking that it would function like an unmanaged layer, and everything disappeared from that environment. So that was startling to me, but I mean, at this point, it's not a surprise. I understand it.
Yep.
At that time, though, I was very fresh to ALM, to manage versus unmanaged.
Yeah. So I think that's a common problem. I think a lot of people, if they don't have that understanding, they're going to make those mistakes, right? I think part of this conversation is to walk through those frustrations and then talk about how it has gotten better for us, the things we've learned. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think the other thing that I see that I was frustrated with, and still am a little bit frustrated with, is I haven't found a definitive guide on how to organize components in solutions, right? So if you know anything about solutions in the Power Platform, you know there are entities or tables that have forms and views, and then you have Power Automate flows, and you have apps, and you have business rules, all of these parts and pieces, right? And so there's a question about, well, if I have all of these things, how should I assemble them? And so often where people begin, where they start is, well, I'm just going to put everything in one solution. Right?
Yeah, and I think if it's a small project, that's not exactly harmful to do, you know?
Yep. And the challenge there is related to what you had said, which is if you don't fully understand how those things are interrelated, that you could end up in a situation with a managed solution where you're trying to, in our recent experience, you want to remove something from the production environment, but you can't because there's a blocking dependency, right? There's something else that's there that you haven't figured out how to get rid of yet. That's in the way. And so then it's what that means is, well, all we can do is update, right? And so that means we've got legacy columns and maybe tables even hanging out in the production environment that we don't want to use anymore, right? And so that's frustrating. As a developer, there's a quality of life problem there.
Yeah,
right?
We can't do any cleanup. We just keep hoarding things in this solution.
And hiding them with security rules, roles and stuff like that. Yeah. What are the things that we've learned that makes life better for us as developers, that might help other people, that might make ultimately the user experience better for end users, in regards to solution organization, design, and deployment, and then ultimately what would we call it, end user functionality and user experience in something like a model-driven app?
I guess when I think about that, in terms of solution architecture, not necessarily from the user experience that you have in the UI, but I think of the ALM process, the push to production.
Yep.
I think of there's this delay. So you create something in dev, you push it to test. It gets verified by your users, and then you push it to production. So there is a process in place where I have created the thing that we're expecting in production, but I need to get it through test and then prod. Okay. So if I have additional things that are in development, it's all pushed as one package. I can't slice it up within that solution itself. But if I were to design additional solutions where certain things live, I can push things, I'm doing air quotes, in isolation. So I think of a project I have where I have most of my stuff in one solution. It's a relatively small project. It focuses on just one process. But I have some changes that happen fairly rapidly to the security roles associated to that project. So I have those security roles in the main solution, but I also have an additional one layered underneath that main solution where I can make quick updates just to those. So everything I'm developing to my tables, my apps, or my automations, I don't need to have that completed to be able to update those security roles.
Okay, so you're really pointing at organizing your solution in a way that allows you to independently push different features or different parts of the solution, right? Different components. And we'll talk about like strategies or the right mindset for thinking about that. I think that's one of the challenges is like, well, before you build the solution, do you know where those things should go? Because you may not know what are the things that are going to need to be updated frequently, right?
Right.
Depending on what your users are asking you to do or what the requirements are. So that there's a question there. So, but organizing your solution in a way that allows you to decouple the parts so that they can be pushed independently. So I think that's a good strategy into that. So one of the things that you mentioned, and I have it in my notes, is structure your things that change the most to be on top, right? Or stacked on top of the things that change the least.
Yep.
Right? And so if you think about, a relational data model, maybe your tables, forms, and views are the things at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So that could be a good way to think about it. And then you might stack something on top of that might be, automation, so flows, right? You could have so like I'm not thinking about features at this point, right? I'm thinking about like the stacking of these components, right? And so if you have tables and then maybe your automation or your flows, and then on top of that, maybe you have some Power BI stuff, and then on top of that, maybe you have some apps, right? So that's one way to think about that structure.
Based on object type.
Right.
Yep.
Assuming that things like my apps are going to change much more often than my tables. Right. And so that's one way to think about it. Another way would be, I think, more aligned to what you had alluded to, which was features. Right. So if you can sort out for your users, what are the features that are going to change all the time or more often? Put those features in their own solution, right? So you could have the layers or the stack that I talked about, but then you could separate, well, I know these automations are going to change all the time because we really don't know a lot about them yet. So they're going to go in their own automation solution, right?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think of like decoupling different sections and parts based on, so for example, one of our clients, we have a very large model-driven app where a bulk of the work is done, but then we have a different set of users that are running a Canvas app, say out in the field, and they've got it on their mobile device. I think that it's reasonable to have that set of things. So maybe we have a few automations that they're running out of that Canvas app, and the Canvas app itself in a different solution. So I can work on that development in isolation from the development of the model-driven app.
Yeah.
So if I have a huge change set sitting in test for the model-driven app, I can still push that small set of things for the Canvas app by itself.
Yeah, that's a huge benefit because you may very well, like when you're dealing with end users and customers who are receiving something, right, they're going to have different priorities, and that let's say that Canvas app that's getting pushed out may be the highest priority, but there's all of these other things that are in limbo, right?
Yeah.
That are in a test environment, let's say, and they just haven't had time to review them.
Yeah.
Like, we think they're good, but they haven't reviewed them. You want the ability to make that priority thing possible to be live, independent of those other things, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to structure things according to that need.
Yeah, so, you mentioned object-based structuring. This is then, so I guess, like user group structuring based on who your users are or the function of that thing in isolation.
Yeah. I've actually seen, so this, I was going to add this kind of maybe at the end, but I think this is an appropriate time, and that is, I've kind of from a third-party standpoint witnessed other implementations where I come in and I'm working on something in the Power Platform and I see something that a previous vendor has done,
Okay.
or I'll see something that is part of a Dynamics implementation, right? So for everyone who doesn't understand, like, the Power Platform is literally the underpinnings of Dynamics.
Yep.
And Dynamics has been around a long time, and it's a very useful tool for CRM and a number of other things, and it's like long-lived and it's pretty solid. So when you're thinking about how to structure your solutions, one thing I've told people is, well, stand up a trial of Dynamics Sales or Dynamics whatever, and go look at how their solutions are structured. You can inspect it to a great extent and figure out that, I see they put this app in this solution with these other parts. And so that can be a good hint or a good kind of clue into how you might structure your things.
Yeah. Pull it apart, see how Microsoft has designed their own thing that you are now building an adjacent solution.
Yep. Because what they're doing on a pretty regular basis is they're providing updates to those solution packages that you can then just come along and apply in your environment, and they don't fail, right?
Yeah.
They generally work, and so they're doing something right, and so that's always a good place to go look as a reference.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, like, you can go set up a trial, like 30-day trial or 14-day trial or whatever it is of any of those Dynamics apps, and it literally spins up in a few seconds and you can go look at it. So it's not a huge barrier. So if you don't have one to look at, go stand one up and look at it. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in this stuff and want to get like more engaged, you can always join our community, The Workplace, at jointheworkplace.com. We'll drop a link in the comments, and check that out. And until next time, thanks, Michaela.
See ya.